My name is Emily Harper. I am 35 years old. 7 years ago, my mother convinced the family that my sudden fatigue was me being dramatic to avoid family obligations and get extra sympathy. Now, I was lying in the emergency room after collapsing at my desk at work with no feeling in my legs, and my mother standing over me telling the doctor that I had always been one to exaggerate my problems for attention and turn everything into a big deal. The fear and anger mixed inside me as I lay there, but I knew right then that I had to stand up for myself this time and stop letting her control the narrative no matter how hard it got or what family might say. If you have ever had a parent who made you doubt your own body and mind like that, hit that like button and tell me in the comments what your mother said that made you question everything about your health. I read every single one. And it really helps knowing I am not alone in this. Let me take you back about 7 months because what happened in that emergency room did not start on that day. It started with little things that built up so slowly, I almost missed them until it was too late. I worked as a billing coordinator for a chain of veterinary clinics in suburban Indianapolis, Indiana, handling insurance claims and making sure pet owners paid for everything from routine checkups to emergency surgeries. The pay was decent enough to cover my small apartment and keep me independent, but the days were long and the stress was real. Around the beginning of that period, my mother started visiting more often than usual, always with a bright smile and a container of her special vitamin supplements she insisted I needed because I looked run down. She would say things like, "You push yourself too hard at that job of yours, and a woman your age should not be this tired all the time." It sounded caring at first. I would take the supplements because refusing would turn into a whole conversation about how ungrateful I was and how she only wanted to help. My father and my sister would nod along when she brought it up during our weekly family calls. My sister Lauren Brooks lived just 20 minutes away with her own family, and she would chime in that maybe I needed to slow down and let my mother take care of me more. I brushed it off as normal mothering, but the symptoms started creeping in anyway. Tingling in my feet after long shifts. Crushing fatigue that made my 8-hour days feel like marathons. Blurred vision that would hit out of nowhere and then fade. I mentioned it to my mother during one of her drop-by visits, and she waved it off with that sharp little laugh of hers. "Oh, Emily, you are always looking for something to be wrong." Young women these days have no stamina at all. She said it right in front of my father, Robert Harper, who was sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee. Instead of staying quiet, he suddenly slammed his cup down and cut in with real frustration in his voice. "Margaret, stop babying her like that. If she says something is wrong, maybe we should listen for once instead of pretending everything is fine." It shocked me because my father rarely pushed back on her, but the moment passed when my mother shot him a look and he dropped it. The small violations kept coming. My mother would show up unannounced with more supplements or homemade smoothies she claimed were better than anything from the store. She would watch me drink them with this satisfied expression and then casually mention how my sister never had these problems because she knew how to take care of herself. Every time I tried to see a doctor on my own, she would call later that same day to ask what the doctor said and then dismiss the appointment as a waste of money. "You are overthinking it, Emily. Drink the supplements I brought and stop running to professionals for every little ache." My best friend and co-worker, Sarah Mitchell, noticed the change first. We shared an office at the clinic chain, and one afternoon, she pulled me aside after I had to sit down because my legs felt like jelly. "Emily, you look terrible. This has been going on for months. You need to get real help and not just listen to your mother." Then came the day everything broke open. I was at my desk, processing a stack of claims, when the numbness hit harder than ever. My legs simply stopped working mid-step to the printer. I went down hard right there in the open office with coworkers rushing over. Sarah Mitchell was the first to reach me. She called the ambulance while I lay there, trying to move my toes and feeling nothing below my hips. The terror was real and absolute. When the paramedics arrived, my mother somehow showed up 20 minutes later because Sarah had called her from my phone contacts. By the time I was loaded into the ambulance, my mother was already in the emergency room waiting room, acting like the concerned parent. In the hospital room, Dr. Olivia Grant, a calm, no-nonsense physician in her mid-40s, started the neurochecks right away. She tested sensation in my legs with a pin and got zero response. My reflexes were gone. I told her about the 7 months of symptoms and the supplements my mother brought every week. Dr. Olivia Grant wrote everything down without changing expression, but I saw her pen pause when I mentioned the smoothies. My mother stood right there, arms crossed, and jumped in before the doctor could ask another question. "Doctor, she has always been like this, exaggerating every little thing to get attention. She probably just needs rest and to stop working so hard." The words landed like a slap. My father, who had arrived with my sister, stood by the bed. Instead of staying silent, he suddenly turned on my mother with a sharp edge I had never heard before. "Margaret, that is enough. If the doctor needs to run tests, then let her run them instead of you deciding for everyone." It was shocking because it was the first time in years he had openly contradicted her in front of people. But the moment the doctor left the room, he pulled me aside and whispered that my mother was only trying to help in her own way, and I should not make it worse. The mixed signals left me reeling. My sister just nodded along with whatever my mother said next, as if none of it was strange. The tests started immediately. Blood work, an MRI of my spine. Dr. Olivia Grant ordered a full toxicology screen because something in my story did not add up to her. I lay there in the hospital bed, watching the monitors beep and feeling the first real spark of doubt about everything my mother had been feeding me, literally and figuratively. Sarah Mitchell came by after her shift with flowers and a worried face. She told me quietly that the office was buzzing about my collapse and that she had overheard my mother on the phone in the waiting room, talking about some insurance paperwork I never knew existed. The conversation ended there because a nurse came in, but that single sentence hung in the air like a threat. Later that evening, my mother came back alone. She sat by my bed and leaned in close with that familiar sarcastic tone she used when she wanted to cut deep without raising her voice. "Emily, you have always been the sensitive one in the family, making mountains out of molehills, and now look at the scene you caused at work. Your sister never does this to us." The jab hit exactly where it hurt most. I felt my chest tighten, but before I could respond, my father walked in. And for the second time that day, he did something unexpected. He simply changed the subject to the weather outside and suggested we all pray for quick recovery, as if that solved anything. The frustration built inside me like a storm I could not release. I spent that first night in the hospital staring at the ceiling and replaying every supplement my mother had insisted I take. The numbness was still there, but the terror had shifted into something sharper. Anger, determination. I did not know what the tests would show yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This time, I would not let my mother rewrite the story of what was happening to my body. The next morning, Dr. Olivia Grant came in with the initial results, and the first real twist landed. The scan showed clear progressive damage to my peripheral nervous system, the kind of stripping away of the protective coating on the nerves that did not match any standard autoimmune condition or simple stress. The pattern was chemical, and the expanded toxicology screen confirmed consistent low-level traces of a specific industrial solvent. The levels in my system lined up perfectly, with repeated small-dose ingestion over months, not a one-time accident. My mother stepped forward before the doctor could finish her next sentence. Her voice carried that familiar sarcastic bite. "Emily, you have always been the sensitive one in this family, turning every little ache into a full-blown crisis. So the rest of us have to drop everything and feel sorry for you. Your sister never puts us through anything like this. She handles her responsibilities without making herself the center of attention all the time." The words landed hard and personal, slicing right into the fear I was already carrying and making my chest tighten with a mix of hurt and rising anger that I could not quite voice yet. My father, who had been listening quietly until that moment, suddenly had a reaction that caught everyone off guard. He straightened up with a sharp, defensive outburst that filled the small hospital room. "Margaret is completely right, Emily. You are putting this entire family under unnecessary stress with all these wild tests and implications. We should be thanking your mother for trying to keep you healthy instead of treating her like some kind of suspect." His tone was loud and protective of her in a way I had never heard directed at me before, and the way he completely flipped after his earlier comments left me feeling blindsided and utterly alone, even with people standing right there. Dr. Olivia Grant kept her expression neutral, but I noticed her writing more notes and glancing toward the door. She suggested we bring in the hospital's patient advocate right away and mentioned that, given the chemical signature and the timeline they might need, to loop in someone from outside for a fuller picture. Before I could process that fully, my best friend, Sarah Mitchell, slipped into the room after the doctor gave her a quick nod. She had been waiting in the hallway since the ambulance, and now she leaned close to my bed with a worried look that told me she'd been holding something back. "Emily, I overheard your mother on the phone out there earlier talking to someone about updating a life insurance policy in your name from a couple of months ago. It sounded off like she was making sure the paperwork was in order for some big payout, and I just thought you should know." The air in the room grew thick enough to choke on. My mother turned on Sarah with another vicious jab, laced in that cold sarcasm she wielded like a weapon. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Sarah, you are as bad as Emily, always seeing conspiracies where there are none. This is why I keep telling my daughter she needs better influences at that job of hers instead of people who feed her these paranoid ideas." She made it sound so reasonable and caring on the surface, but the undertone was pure contempt that made my stomach twist. Sarah did not back down, though, and that small show of loyalty felt like the only solid ground I had left. My father then did something even more frustrating and unexpected. Without another word, he stood up abruptly and walked out of the room, entirely physical avoidance that spoke louder than any argument. He came back 10 minutes later, after I had been left alone with my thoughts, and pulled me into a quiet, private confrontation in the hallway once the nurse stepped out. "Emily, your mother has done nothing but sacrifice for this family for years, and you are repaying her by turning a simple health issue into some kind of accusation. If you keep this up, you will destroy everything we have built together." His voice stayed low, but the quiet anger in it was unmistakable, and the way he framed me as the destroyer left me reeling with a fresh wave of betrayal that made the numbness in my legs feel almost secondary. Meanwhile, Detective Karen Ellis from the local department arrived after Dr. Olivia Grant made the call. She was a straightforward woman, in her early 50s, with a badge clipped to her belt, and a way of asking questions that made it clear she had seen every version of family stories like this. She sat in the chair the doctor had used earlier and went over the same details about the smoothies, the exact timeline, and how my mother had been the only one preparing them week after week. My mother tried to interrupt with more of her cutting remarks, but Detective Karen Ellis shut that down firmly and asked her to step outside for a moment. The detective told me quietly that the chemical involved was something readily available through certain part-time work or volunteer channels, and that the pattern pointed to intentional repeated exposure rather than coincidence. I lay there processing it all, while Sarah stayed by my side, squeezing my hand. She whispered that she had already reached out to a family attorney she knew named Michael Reyes, just in case things escalated, because she had seen enough red flags to worry about financial angles, too. When I finally got a moment alone with my phone later that evening, I logged into the joint account my mother had insisted we keep linked for family emergencies. What I found made my blood run cold. Small transfers over the last 4 months labeled as household expenses, but totaling nearly $45,000, routed to an account I did not recognize. The pieces were starting to click together in a way that felt too calculated to ignore, and the fear mixed with a deep resolve that this time I would not let her rewrite reality. The next morning brought the next escalation. Detective Karen Ellis returned with the search warrant results from my mother's house. They had found a half-empty container of the exact industrial solvent in her garage, behind some old gardening supplies, and receipts showing purchases that matched the timeline perfectly. My mother was not under arrest yet, but she was being asked to come in for formal questioning, and the detective warned me that the district attorney was building a case for intentional harm. When my mother heard the news over the phone from my sister, she called me directly, her voice laced with even sharper contempt than before. "Emily, if you do not drop this nonsense right now and tell them it was all a misunderstanding, you will regret the day you were born into this family. Families protect their own, not tear them apart for attention." The line went dead before I could respond, and the threat lingered in the quiet hospital room like smoke. My sister, Lauren Brooks, showed up shortly after, with my father in tow, and the two of them tried one last round of pressure while the nurse was changing my IV. My sister started it this time, but my mother had clearly coached her, because the words carried the same vicious personal jabs. "Emily, you have always been jealous of how close Mom and I are, and now you are trying to destroy that because you cannot handle being the weak one." My father did not interrupt or defend me. Instead, he nodded along at first, then changed the subject abruptly to how much this was costing the family in stress and medical bills, as if that was the real crime. The mixed reactions from him, one moment defensive outburst, the next forced deflection, left me feeling more frustrated and shocked than ever, because I could not predict which version of him would show up. Sarah Mitchell brought me my phone later that afternoon, and there was a text from an unknown number that turned out to be from my mother using my sister's phone. It read simply, "Stop this now, or you will have no family left to turn to." The message was the final push I needed. I called Michael Reyes right then and asked him to start the paperwork for emergency protection and to look into severing any financial ties my mother had forced on me over the years. The attorney said it would be messy, but the evidence from the hospital and the detective was strong enough to get a temporary order, keeping her away from my care decisions. As the afternoon light shifted in the room, I lay there, feeling the first real numbness lift slightly in my toes, but the emotional weight was heavier than ever. My mother had spent 7 months feeding me those smoothies week after week, all while building a story that painted me as the dramatic one. The detective came back one more time before evening with news that the district attorney was moving forward with charges of intentional harm and financial exploitation, but my mother had already lawyered up and was denying everything with that same sarcastic tone she had used on me for years. She even told the detective that I had mental health issues and was making it all up to get sympathy. The words still stung, but they no longer surprised me. I made the decision then, lying in that bed with the monitors beeping around me. I would set the boundaries no matter what it cost me. I would recover on my own terms, and I would walk away from the family that had chosen to believe her lies over my truth. The isolation was already settling in, but for the first time it felt like the only path that would let me breathe. The next few weeks blurred into a painful recovery that tested every bit of strength I had left. Physical therapy started slowly in the hospital corridor, with me taking 4 shaky steps at a time while my legs trembled and the left one stayed noticeably weaker. Sarah visited every day after her shifts at the clinic, bringing small things from my apartment and updating me on the office, which had rallied around me in a way my own family never had. My father tried calling once, from a number I did not recognize, his voice careful, and shifting into another unexpected reaction this time. A forced, awkward attempt to smooth things over without admitting any fault. "Emily, your mother is hurting too. And maybe we can all sit down once you are home and work this out like adults." I hung up without answering because the pattern of his reactions had become too exhausting to predict, one moment defending her, the next avoiding the truth entirely. The legal process moved forward, but not in the clean, satisfying way stories sometimes pretend. My mother was charged, and the district attorney presented the toxicology evidence, the forged insurance policy, for $250,000, and the transfers totaling nearly $45,000 from the family account she controlled. She denied everything in court with that same sarcastic tone, claiming I had mental health issues and had been obsessed with being sick for attention. My father testified, briefly supporting her version in a quiet way that avoided direct confrontation, but still sided with her completely. My sister, Lauren Brooks, sat in the gallery nodding along, and the whole thing left me feeling exposed and raw, even though I was not in the room. Michael Reyes negotiated a plea that kept my mother out of prison, but required her to surrender any claim to the insurance and pay restitution for the medical costs, which came to almost $62,000. It was not the justice I had hoped for, but it was enough to sever the financial ties. I was discharged after 3 weeks and moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Indianapolis, far enough from my family that I would not accidentally run into them at the grocery store. Sarah helped me pack and drove me there the day I left the hospital. She had become more than a coworker by then, the one steady person who never doubted my story. I adopted a small rescue dog from the local shelter, a scruffy terrier mix with one ear that flopped permanently, and I named him Echo because his bark reminded me every day that my voice finally mattered. The numbness in my feet never fully went away, and some mornings the weakness made walking to the mailbox feel like a small victory, but I managed. The real cost came in the silence that followed. My mother never reached out again after the protection order, and neither did my father or my sister. The family group chat went quiet. No birthday calls, no holiday invitations. I set the boundaries exactly as I had promised myself in that hospital bed, but the loneliness settled in deeper than I expected. There were nights when the apartment felt too quiet, and I wondered if choosing myself had been worth losing every connection I had grown up with. My mother's final sarcastic words still echoed sometimes in my head, making me question if I had exaggerated or if the family had simply chosen the easier story. Sarah and Dr. Olivia Grant checked in regularly, and Michael Reyes made sure the restitution payments arrived on time. But it was not the same as having a family, even a broken one. 6 months later, I went back to work part-time at the veterinary clinics, handling fewer claims and focusing on what my body could manage. The fatigue still lingered on bad days, but the blurred vision had faded completely. I never heard directly from my mother again, though Sarah mentioned once that she had seen her at a community event, acting as if nothing had happened, smiling and chatting with old neighbors like the perfect concerned parent. The knowledge that she had gotten away with so much without real consequences stung, but I reminded myself that my safety and my peace were the only things that mattered now. I had walked away with my life and my independence, even if it meant standing completely alone. Sometimes the hardest part of setting boundaries is realizing that the people who should fight to keep you close are the ones who let you go without a single word. I chose self-preservation because staying would have cost me everything I had left. And yet the isolation that came with it taught me that freedom can feel heavier than chains when you carry it by yourself. I do not regret the choice, but I live with the quiet ache of it every single day. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. If you have ever had to walk away from family to save yourself and ended up feeling more alone than you expected, hit that like button and tell me in the comments what boundary you set that changed everything, even if it left you isolated. I read every single one, and it truly helps knowing we are all figuring this out together